Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the EDB, MAS, the MASIC and GIC, I welcome all of you to the 4th Singapore Summit. Thank you for your attendance and for your support. Some of you have been with us from the beginning. To you, I express a particular thanks. Last night, we had an outstanding session with India's Finance Minister Arun Jaitley. He batted with ease the balls which hurled at him from different directions. But what was most impressive was the inner serenity and the confidence. My ears pricked when he said that India is a major beneficiary of the fall in oil prices, and that premium is diverted to infrastructural development. And he said the road building program is back on track. And he was confident that next year he'll be able to move the GST bill. Connectivity, GST, logistics, these will add significantly to the growth of the Indian economy. And we almost take it for granted now that India should grow faster than China. A year ago, 2 years ago, we would have thought differently. But it did last year, and it will this year, albeit from a much lower base. And in this recent financial turmoil, India was less affected. But I also noticed when it was suggested to Minister Arun Jaitley that India should benefit from China's discomfiture, he said no. India benefits from China's growth. If you watch carefully India's relationship with China, it is a historic dance of great consequence. A few months ago, when Prime Minister Modi visited China, the choreography was most impressive. They went back to the first millennium, to the travels of Buddhist monks, of a Chinese monk who went to India, of an Indian monk who went to China, to Xi'an, to translate sutras, of a Chinese monk who went to India in the 7th century, and so on. So the visit began in Xi'an. And when Modi went to Beijing, at the Tiantan, the temple of heaven, where imperial sacrifices were enacted, a magnificent display of Tai Chi and yoga, two ancient peoples bowing to each other. But some Indian friends told me that when it came to selfie taking with young people, Modi was much more comfortable than Premier Li Keqiang. You know, for the first time, financial turmoil in China created turbulence around the world and hit New York. This is a historic event because it is a portent of things to come. Yes, China fumbled. I mean, it could have avoided certain obvious mistakes, which many of us saw coming. But they will learn from it. But it shows now how the relative weights are shifting in the world. China is still less than 15% of global GDP. But last year, China's contribution to global growth was some 40%. So when that slackens, everyone feels it. And just 2 days ago, when Fed Reserve Chairman Yellen nuanced her speech, she referred to China and why, despite fairly good US growth, it's more prudent not to up rates just yet. It shows growing interdependence And not surprisingly, all over the world, people are concerned about China's prospects. Is this the beginning of a decline? Are the internal contradictions sharpening, portending further, more serious problems? In fact, China's prospects are good. And the closer you are to China, the more you feel that. The more you visit China, the more you realize that despite all the problems, the country is organically in a phase of growth. In terms of aggregate demand, it will take many more years before the Chinese economy has a big enough domestic consumption sector to drive it. And that consumption must increasingly shift to services. Coastal China has become very expensive, more expensive than all of Southeast Asia except Singapore. So the factories are flowing down to Southeast Asia. The Chinese government wants to move some of them inland to develop inner China. But these are secular long-term trends. For the time being, they will still need investments to drive the economy. Within China, yes, there's still many things to be done, many areas to be opened up. But the growth will no longer be as dramatic. The second derivative has come down. This is why President Xi Jinping's initiative, One Belt, One Road, is of great importance. Not as an immediate plan, but as a long-term approach towards China's development. To begin with, there's all this excess capacity, steel, cement, factories producing rolling stock, which can be applied to great use, linking China to its neighbors. And this growing connectivity of China to its neighbors, deep into Eurasia, it is an epic story, and one we should follow very carefully. China today has a real link to the Persian Gulf, finally through earlier this year. Through Kazakhstan, they have a link to the Caspian. Now there's a link from Kazakhstan through Turkmenistan to Iran. And with the opening of Iran, the picture will change. Throughout history, between Imperial China and Imperial Persia, they've always had good relations, two high civilizations maintaining peace in the region. You will see it replayed in the coming years. And the pent-up demand in Iran, momentarily held back because of the expectation of prices coming down, is something all of us should pay close attention to. Into all the seas of Eurasia, China is planning enormous railroad expansion to the Gulf of Thailand, to the Andaman Sea, to the Arabian Gulf, through the Gujarat Pass to Gwadar, to the Persian Gulf, to the Black Sea, to the Baltic Sea, to the North Sea. And early this year, between Moscow and Beijing, they talked about building a fast train between these two cities, 7,000 kilometers, less than 2 days. I thought, gosh, how can you justify such an investment? Of course you cannot, on the basis of freight rates and passenger fares. But if along the way you build a belt of cities, then the whole picture changes. And this is the import of One Belt, One Road, announced first in Astana in October 2013 by President Xi, and the following month in Jakarta in November 2013. One Belt, One Road, not a plan on paper, but creating a flow, at the end of which we are going to find Eurasia crisscrossed by connections. It's like angiogenesis in the human body. First you grow the vessels, Then logistics companies like mine will provide the blood circulation, and growth begins. And it is a large part of the world. And it will, in a few decades from now, be the principal driver of the global economy. And this is why the AIIB Bank is so important. I mean, many analysts saw it as a power move against the US, vis-a-vis the Bretton Woods institutions. Not at all. It is an absolute necessity. And even what it does will only be a small part of what is required to finance this connectivity that has got to be developed. And it will involve trillions of dollars. And although it's not yet said, one day you'll find the Chinese rail system and the Indian rail system linking up through the Natula Pass. It is a short distance and a much easier connection than the one through the Gujarat Pass. Politically, the time is not ripe to talk about it, but watching the relations between the two is no longer something to be dismissed. China knows that to really develop the real economy, it must deepen and liberalize its capital markets. Inefficiencies there have led to inefficient SOEs, leading to all kinds of problems in the country. I don't think, despite the recent financial turmoil, that this strategic direction to deepen capital markets will change. They will learn from their mistakes. And they will have to experiment along the way because they are doing things which no other country can do. The internationalization of the renminbi is a case in point. It is not something simple because the Chinese are now attempting to create two separate pools of renminbi within China, which is a big pool, and outside China. And in between, going through portals like Hong Kong and to a lesser extent Singapore. With tidal barrages, like the one protecting Venice, if there's financial turbulence outside, the barrages can come up and protect the inland ocean. The fact is, the long history of Chinese civilization, having to govern a large part of the world's population, it must always be able to exercise some control over its own internal destiny. In the 19th century, after the Second Opium War, any ship landing on the China coast would be inspected by Western customs officers. By the late Qing, China lost control of its monetary system, and it will not repeat this mistake. But it is not easy, because if the two levels are different, there's a permanent arbitrage opportunity. So it has to be intervened in a sophisticated way. And mistakes will be made, but they are learning. What is most impressive about China is that in the world today, among all the major countries, it is the only one which can exercise national will. When President Xi talks about one belt, one road, it percolates right down to the county. So there is like a lens, focusing effort. To resolve the problem of pollution in China, which is horrible, gargantuan efforts are now being made. And recently, they decided that for ecological management, Hebei province, Tianjin city, Beijing city will be managed as one entity, 150 million people. No other country on earth can take a political decision, do this, and it will mostly be done. It is the great strength and the great weakness of China, and puts it in stark contrast to India. In India, you have to take long meanders. In China, you build a canal straight to the sea. Of course, sometimes you get it wrong, and the consequences are severe. But this is by way of backdrop to fears that China will somehow go into recession. China will not go into recession. Its growth will slow down, maybe to 6%, maybe to 5.5%, but on a very high base. And that's nothing to ignore. But there is a dangerous period the world is going into now, which is the lack of aggregate demand powering the global economy. Kept afloat like steroids by cheap money in the last 7 years. And we keep on prolonging it, fearing that if we withdraw it, asset markets will suddenly implode, bubbles will burst, and the real economy will spiral downwards. And it will take some years before the Chinese economy and the Eurasian economies will be big enough to take up what is insufficient in the mature economies. I mean, Europe is floundering. Earlier this year, freight rates per container from China to Europe went down to $200. Never seen before. And it may take some time before Europe recovers. The US, yes, looking better, but without policy coordination. And even with policy coordination, we may be moving into a dangerous period. For this reason, the coming meeting next week between President Xi Jinping and President Obama will be very important. They will have to talk about many things. The newspapers talk about the South China Sea. Yes, the South China Sea is important, and it will be an important item of the agenda. But it will not be the only item, and it will not be the most important. The most important will be the global economy. Because if we get that wrong, I think all of us are in danger. But even if we go into a downturn, 3, 4, 5 years, a kind of a worst-case scenario, what will emerge out of it? A different China, a different India, and ASEAN in between. If you look at ASEAN, Indonesia, last year we talked about fuel subsidy reform that's been done, but they could do better. So President Jokowi changed his cabinet recently, hoping to achieve better policy coordination. I mean, this haze we are experiencing in Singapore is because of a lack of capacity in Indonesia. I mean, we complain about here in Singapore, but it's 10 times worse in Sumatra and in Borneo. So it's their own people who are suffering, and their own people's needs whom they have got to attend to, but they will need time. Malaysia, the plunge in the ringgit expresses general concern about the situation there. Thailand, the army leaders changing the entire economic team, now under Dr. Samkit Jatusrira, hoping that in the next 1.5 years, reforms can take a major move forward and give a kick to the Thai economy. Mind you, Thailand is the best positioned country in Southeast Asia. Vietnam is not doing badly. And Myanmar elections in November, it is a difficult but a fairly well carried out process of national reconciliation. The army, Aung San Suu Kyi's NLD, and the various ethnic groups. The fact that we are having elections, which should be generally free and fair, is a huge step forward. And recently, with the minority groups, they are making very good progress. The Muslim problem is important, but we can't fixate on it. The greater the process of national reconciliation, the more they'll be able to resolve the Muslim problem in Rakhine State. Sequencing is very important. The Philippines, fastest growing country in Southeast Asia, on a roll. We are having Cesar Purisima coming to address us afterwards. Our worry is not President Aquino or Cesar, but what happens after them, because Filipino politics has its own dynamics. But anyway, we shouldn't steal Cesar's thunder. I'm sure he has much to talk about this afterwards. And after lunch, we have Minister Jing Liqun talking to us about the AIIB Bank. And in between, Prime Minister Lee will be talking to us about Singapore and the world. Singapore just had general elections. It was a landslide victory for Prime Minister Lee. A bit unexpected, but a wonderful outcome. A critical period like this, where we've got to navigate difficult waters, the people of Singapore decided to coalesce, and this time bringing along a younger generation. We talk about Asia confluence in Singapore. Indeed, this is what it is. Last night, Minister Lim Hng Kiang, he cited a report saying that in 2050, it is likely that 3 of the 4 biggest economies in the world will be in Asia. China, India, Indonesia, mostly driven by population and demographics. China, India, Indonesia. Imagine that map before you. Singapore right in the middle. That half of the world, in relative peace, linking up, blood vessels, blood flow, organs growing. It is a fantastic part of the world to be in. And I hope that we will have many more good Singapore summits to come. It will be a tight afternoon. Immediately after this, Nick Gowing will chair a session on the uncertainties ahead and how we should respond to them. Then we have Cesar speaking to us, Prime Minister Lee, lunch. After lunch, Linda Yue will chair a session on, in a resource-constrained world, how we avoid risks and seize opportunities. And then we will have Minister Jing talk to us about AIIB. There will be many questions, I'm sure, Minister Jing. And after that, a final session on game changers, and mostly about technology. Technology which is destroying jobs faster than new ones can be created, eroding, corroding old structures, forcing a new process of Darwinian selection, that those who respond first and fastest will surge ahead while others will be left behind. Then we should close by 4:45 so that you still have a late afternoon and evening off for your own meetings. Chatham House rules, which means except for the presentations by Cesar, by Minister Lin and by Prime Minister Lee, you should not quote anybody or cite anybody without first checking with him. And we will welcome your feedback. Your feedback in the past has been invaluable to us. Thank you very much.